Welcome to another episode of Living Fully Fit. I'm Coach AJ, your certified life and fitness coach, as we look into another way to navigate through different aspects of fitness, whether it's your emotional, mental, spiritual, physical, relational fitness. And this aspect and this segment especially, we're going to be looking at relational fitness and how do we navigate through cutting ties of toxic relationships. This is a touchy subject for a lot of people because I think a lot of people don't know how to do this. So what they end up doing is doing nothing and keeping those toxic relationships around and hoping that maybe someday it'll get better, or maybe just if we ignore it and don't deal with it, it'll go away by itself. And as anything else like that, anything unhealthy like that, it doesn't go away by itself. So what I'm going to do here in this segment, this podcast, we're going to look at how do we navigate through and understand and identify toxic relationships, whether it's in your family, your professional workspace, whether it's in a relation like a dating or a romantic relationship, or even if it's like in the church, wherever location you're at. It doesn't matter. We're looking at how we identify that and how do we navigate through that. And when it comes to the point of, you know what, we might have to cut ties. And what I'm going to do as well is draw that line in the sand of cutting ties with toxic relationships versus cancel culture. We're not talking about canceling people, we're talking about cutting ties of unhealthy and toxic relationships. But first step we have to do is identify toxic relationships. Before we can cut ties, we have to first recognize toxicity. We have to be able to identify that in our relationships. Toxic relationships can be emotionally draining, manipulative, and detrimental to our well being. They can sometimes come in many forms, from friendships and romantic relationships to family ties and professional connections. And really, the signs of toxicity include being constantly talked about in a negative way, lack of respect of boundaries, and feeling drained after the interactions. Those are just some clear signs. But you know for yourself what those signs are. You can feel it when you're around that person. Even if it's, crazy Uncle Larry or Uncle Jim, who's always a pervert and says perverted things, but you know what? That's just the way it was. That's just the way he is, and we just ignore it and think it's funny. Crazy Uncle Tom here, who's drunk all the time at family reunions. No, those aren't good things. Those are toxic things that we can't ignore anymore, especially in today's society. So we have to look for those signs of, what is best for us, what is best for our family, especially. Toxic relationships often exhibit patterns of control, patterns of manipulation, patterns of emotional abuse. It's important to pay attention to how you feel when you're interacting with certain people. If you consistently feel drained, anxious, or invalidated, it might be a sign of toxicity. This goes back to the idea that, well, this is the way we've done things. This is our family. This is how we do it here. No, it's not how we do it. Or you have like, a work culture. Well, that's just how the boss is. He's a little bit sexist. That's not how he runs things. No, that's not how we should run things. Not how we should do things. That's not how we should function. Just because it's the way it's always been done, typically it's wrong. So I would look at, when it comes to relational fitness and good, healthy relationships and establishing those, but also keeping the healthy relationships in your life, you're going to have to really be able to identify the toxic ones very easily. You know, Here's a good thing you have to ask yourself is, do I feel more energized or drained when I'm around this person? Do I feel like when I'm around this person, I can be safe? It's a safe place for communication, and I'm not talking about disagreements. You're going to have disagreements with everybody. It doesn't mean you have to cut everybody you disagree with out of your life. I'm talking about people who are actually toxic, verbally, mentally, emotionally abusive, maybe even physically abusive. You name it. Someone who's blatantly racist, sexist, whatever it is, someone who's just a very ugly person to be around, always has a negative connotation to everything, always is negative to you, has to cut you down, make them feel better, make you feel smaller. Those are the kind of people you have to identify. And after you really identify, you have to assess the impact. Once we've identified toxic relationships, it's crucial to assess their impact on our lives. Are they hindering our personal growth and happiness? Do they consistently bring negativity into our lives? Assessing these impacts can help us understand the necessity of cutting ties. And I'm not saying you have to cut ties with every person you disagree with, every person you might feel drained with occasionally. But if the trend is you feel drained being around them, then you have to ask yourself why that is. And you have to be honest with your assessment. You have to assess the impact not only on yourself, but let's say you're married with children. You have to assess the impact on them as well. Maybe going to the family reunion where your crazy uncle Fred is always drunk all the time and says crazy inappropriate things. You might have been around that all your childhood, and that's something you're used to, but you know is unhealthy. Maybe you should assess the impact and help protect your children, your wife, your husband, whoever, from that kind of situation. Just because it's the way it's been done doesn't make it right. Just because it's the way we do things culturally doesn't make it right. It's the same thing when it comes down to, going to church. Just because it's the way we do things, how we treat people doesn't make it right. Whatever it is, your work culture. If the work culture is slapping everybody on the butt, that doesn't make it right if you don't feel comfortable in that environment. It reminds me of an episode of Friends where Chandler's boss is slapping him in the butt all the time and he feels very uncomfortable. And so finally, he speaks up, and his boss is like, "Well, okay, well, thanks for letting me know. I won't do that anymore." And that's all it took is making that clear boundary. And guess what? Done deal. But we have to do that. We have to really assess the impact that this doesn't make me feel uncomfortable. I don't care what this culture is about, but I don't like that. I don't like that about this culture. I'm going to be countercultural and maybe even shift culture for the better, right? But really, what it boils down to is assessing that impact on you and others that you're close to. But the next step we have to understand when it comes to before cutting ties, we have to set clear boundaries and communicate those boundaries. Because I would say it's a little unfair if you just cut someone out of your life and they had no idea that that thing that they did or said offended you. If you don't communicate, especially if people you say you care for, whether it's a friend or even a coworker or family member, if you never communicate your boundaries, you never communicate those things that are boundaries to you, and you've never really identified what your boundaries are, you can't just. Honestly, it'd be really difficult just to cut them out. Now, I'd say there's certain aspects where they do something pretty big. Let's say they touched your child in a certain inappropriate way. Then yeah, you know what? No, you don't have to explain your boundaries. They should already know that's wrong. There's certain things they should just know. If your Uncle Fred is over hitting on your wife, yeah, you know what? That's a clear boundary. You shouldn't have to communicate. You're cutting them out right away. Now, I'm talking about other things. We do have to set boundaries because setting boundaries is an essential when cutting ties with toxic individuals. But we have to clearly communicate your decision while prioritizing your mental and emotional well being. Remember, it's okay to put yourself first. I get it, we're raised with we need care what other people think. And yeah, you should to a degree. You don't want to be totally not empathetic to someone else's feelings and thoughts. But you have to take care of yourself because in all reality, no one's going to take care of you better than you. It's important to be assertive in and yet compassionate when communicating your boundaries. It's good to be assertive and say, "Hey, this is my boundary, but understand I love you, but I won't accept this. I won't tolerate this. You're my family. I'm going to give you the warning. I don't think it's appropriate when you're drunk around my kids. Uncle John, whatever your name is." You communicate that, to continue it, then you know what to do next. Cut them out. And clearly expressing your decision to distance yourself from toxic individuals and explain the reasons behind it is healthy. Remember that you deserve to surround yourself with people who uplift and support you and who are healthy for you. If they're not healthy for you, they don't bring value to your life, then it's okay to assess and process, communicate, and cut people out. But there is a process to this, obviously. And don't be afraid of the next step, which is moving forward. Cutting ties with toxic individuals can be challenging. It's a process, but it's a crucial step towards personal growth and happiness. Remember to practice self care, Surround yourself with positive influences. Surround yourself with people who support you, supportive friends, supportive family, even a therapist or a coach, someone who has your corner, so to speak. You know, if people that you are surrounded with drain you, frustrate you more than encourage you, and I'm not saying you're not going to get frustrated with people who are good for you, but I'm talking about people who are in constant conflict all the time, who drain you emotionally and mentally. That's where you have to assess, is this person worth having in my life? Do they really add value? And it's again, that's a hard question to ask yourself. It's a hard thing to assess a lot of times because we don't want to cut people out. And I'm not saying you, again, do the far left of the spectrum, which is cancel culture. Someone offends me, I cancel them. They said something I don't like, cancel them. They lean this way politically, cancel them. And I see this happen all the time in social media. People cancel people so quickly without really having conversation. Here's the thing is I have a lot of friends that I disagree with politically, social, economically, religiously, disagree. And that's okay. We can disagree with things and still come to find some middle ground. That doesn't mean I have to cancel them from my life because they see things differently. Where we do see things similarly are things that are important, how we treat others, how we love others, how we are kind, how we help others in need. Those are the things that are the most important. Are they a good person? I have a friend who is pro-abortion. I don't agree with her stance whatsoever, but I love her nonetheless. She's a great person, actually, with it comes a variety and litany of other things. But with that stance, I disagree. But you know what? We don't talk about that. We don't go into in-depth political arguments because what does that do? All it's going to do is divide and destroy. Where I think we as a culture have quickly just done that and not really considered good conversation and communication. Now, I'm not talking about that when it comes to cutting out people who are toxic. Now, granted, if you have a friend who is, the opposite spectrum of thought and whatnot, and they attack you, then maybe you should consider cutting them out of your life. Now, if you can have a decent conversation when you go back and forth dialogue, but come to the middle to some degree, then you know what? That's a great relationship to have. Why not have good relationships? Why not have diverse thought in your life? I'm not talking about cutting people like that out. I'm talking about cutting people who really hurt you, break you, who are hurting your mental and emotional well-being. I'm not talking about people who just disagree with you. Now, if disagreement turns into being ugly and being dismissive and being narcissistic and not considering your feelings, not showing empathy, then you know what? Yeah, that could be a toxic relationship. Absolutely. So I would look at this. You look at your life. Look at the people in your life. People in your life should bring life to your life. Honestly, they should help enhance your life. If they're not enhancing your life, then you have to ask the question, why? Why are they in your life? What value do they bring? And I'm not saying you should look at people like a number, like, well, they don't bring that much value, so I guess I'll cut them out. No, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about what they can give you. I'm talking about the value they bring to you personally as a person, as emotional fuel, as mental fuel. Those are the kind of things you should be looking at. I'll give you an example for me. So I grew up with my dad. So my dad was my dad all my life. He's the only person I've known. Now, I didn't know this until I was about 10 years old that he was not my biological dad. I found out from my mom that I had a bio dad out there that I've never met. It didn't bother me until I was 18. I went, "Oh, you know what? I want to find out about my dad, my biological dad." So I reached out to him. Um, had a good conversation, and then it fizzled away because his wife found out. So I'm like, okay, well, that sucks. Moving on. I was able to, start healing things with the dad that raised me. My dad, I'll just call my dad because he's the one that raised me. Healing things that he was very emotional and verbally abusive, occasionally physically too. But it took many many years and decades and forgiveness on my part to forgive him to really heal that relationship. And what's funny is we have actually seen a lot of healthy things from that actually. Well, fast forward a little bit now, And as in my 30s, I connected again with my biological dad. And it was like, it was a weird relationship. He was kind of there, kind of supportive. And I just realized that I really wasn't a priority in his life. It seemed like his wife dictated the level of relationship he had with me. And fast forward a little bit more, my kids and my wife at the time, we went to go to Colorado and met him for the first time. I thought there was some promise there, and then after that, never was really connected with him really. He prioritized my other brothers. I felt kind of the outcast, and he and I disagreed with a lot of things, and so finally, I just, after prayer, I had to cut the guy out of my life. He wasn't bringing any value whatsoever to my life. He treated me like I was like a burden. He got mad at me because I didn't take his last name, and I'm like, well, dude, you weren't in my life. Why would I take your name? The guy that raised me, I kept his name because he's my dad. You know, love or hate him, right or wrong, some of the things he did, he still is my dad. And I do attribute some of the things, the person I am today to him, but like with my bio dad, just because he's blood doesn't mean anything to me, honestly, because the guy didn't really accept me as his son. So, it's funny. I just wanted a relationship with him, but he clearly didn't want that back. He wanted it with conditions, and the guy was not a healthy person. So without regret, honestly, I cut him out of my life. And then you have to do that sometimes. You have to cut certain people out of your life that aren't bringing value. And I think honestly, if I would kept in my life, I would have just kept getting hurt and kept getting disappointed. Where my dad that I was raised with, he wasn't the best dad growing up. He was very verbally and emotionally abusive. Cut me down quite a bit. And even physically at towards the end of my teenage years. And when I graduated college, before I joined ministry, I gave him a call one day and say, "Hey, I want to let you know I think you were a terrible dad, but I want you to know I forgive you. Before I do this thing in ministry, I need to let you know I forgive you." And his response to me was like, "Well, Andre, you're a better man than me," and that really meant a lot. And so, what's funny is since then, he and I have maintained and grown a relationship, from afar because he lives in California and I'm all over the place. And we've been able to really grow something. He's been the most encouraging person in my army career, especially, and really giving me great advice and that kind of stuff. And been very, loving towards, my kiddos and those kind of things. So it's just been very interesting, the people that surprise you of who's going to be in your life and the people you have to cut out. I had assumed I would be cutting him out in my life eventually because just how things went when I was a teenager, especially. But that didn't really happen. It ended up being quite the opposite. God works in mysterious ways, and I tell this story because honestly, for you, whoever you are, as you develop awareness of the right people to keep in your life and the right people to cut out, you will learn that it's not the people you expect sometimes. Like, you have to look at what's healthy for you, the people that you should keep in your life, the people who bring value, people that are reaching out to you especially. I look at a healthy relationship in my life right now as my fiance. She and I have an amazing relationship where we communicate very clearly. I don't think one time we've ever crossed a boundary. We never had to really share our boundaries because we really know what they are because we talk a lot. We share our heart a lot. And when you're close with someone, when you share your heart a lot, when you're honest with communication with the people you love and care for, they already know your boundaries, so it's very easy for them to maintain that. And I think that's why she and I have a great relationship, is because we communicate that very clearly all the time. We don't have to say, "Hey, you're teeter-tottering that boundary, man." We never had that. We've never had that issue. We've never had an argument for that matter because we communicate very well. When you have that good, healthy relationship, when things are, you have questions, you have concerns, which she and I have had before. We've had concerns and questions, but guess what? We move on pretty quickly from them because we communicate quite clearly, because we have good relationship, good boundaries. I look at people in my past that I've dated and been with, and I didn't have that. I dated this girl where, gosh, we broke up and she kept going back and forth with me on text, and I was like, dear Lord, leave me alone. Here's my boundary. I am with my kids right now. You shouldn't be blowing up my phone right now. She couldn't respect that boundary, kept going. I said, I just had to cancel her out of my life, so to speak. I had to cut her out completely, block her and everything. She still found a way to find me through my YouTube channel, actually, which was weird. Um, but it's sometimes that's necessary. It's not fun to cut someone out of your life. It never is. It doesn't feel good sometimes, but it's the best thing when it affects your emotional and mental health. When people cross those boundaries so many times, they will continue to cross them. And you have to be honest with yourself on what's best for you, what's best for your family. So, in closing, I'm going to say this. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to remind you to that cutting ties with individuals, especially toxic individuals, is an act of self love and empowerment. Trust your instincts, pray, prioritize your well being, and remember that you deserve healthy and fulfilling relationships. Don't feel guilty by doing the right thing for you. Again, don't make knee jerk, decisions and just make something happen willy nilly. Think about it, pray about it, assess, look at all the aspects, and then make your decision from there. And just know that when you make those right decisions, you'll feel a lot better when you do. Anyways, hope this segment helped you as you're navigating through how to cut through toxic relationships and dealing with those kind of things. I'm Coach AJ. And like I said, what I do here in this channel is help develop people to be better versions of themselves in every aspect of fitness. And today's segment was all about relational fitness. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to go ahead and subscribe down below. Hit the notification bell to receive more updates and more content like this as well. And if you know anybody that can benefit from this kind of content, go ahead and share with a link to, and send me a comment. If you have some questions that you're dealing with something like this, like dealing with toxic relationships, you're not too sure what to do, send me a comment. I would love to talk to you and get to know you. Anyways, thanks for watching another episode of Living Fully Fit with Coach AJ. Take care.